Many of the analysis on geographical data involves answering questions that are integrated about a place. Okay, the place can be described by many different themes. For example, we can have knowledge about the land use, the soil, the tax records, the administrative units, etc. But we will try to answer those questions. These has to be brought into an integrated form. So overlay analysis will be one of the very powerful tools, allows us to study a place as a unit. So overlay analysis is just like the name indicates. It is about overlaying information themes from one to the other so that we can relate those information into uniform formats. For the example that we show here, we have represented a place by 4 themes. One is soil type. Then we also have a theme talking about the rivers. On the top of that, we have a theme describing buildings. And then on the most top, the area we show the different kind of water wells. These are seemingly different things, but because they all talk about the same place, they actually relate to each other through geography. By integrating them through geography, we have a more comprehensive view of this place. In many cases, we will need to answer questions that are related to how one theme connects with another theme through location, through place. For example, we can ask for this particular water well, what is the soil type beneath it? In order to do that, we can figure out an overlay of these 2 themes, soil type and water well, and then do the attributes integration through overlay connection. We could also, looking at statistics, how many of one thing inside another thing. These kind of questions are very common in spatial analysis. There are several reasons we may want to do overlay analysis. One of the typical reasons we do overlay is that we want to find out whether certain geographical features fall into some areas of our interest. Right? The case that is more complicated is when the features are only partially within, and exactly which part is inside, which part is not, cannot be easily determined without doing further geometric division of those features. So overlay analysis can help us decide exactly where it's in, where it's out. Another kind of application for overlay analysis is what we call the suitability of a particular place or location for a certain kind of application. Maybe we're looking for a new development of commercial activity, and that activity needs certain condition. For example, if you want to establish a new school, the schools need to be located in a relatively flat area that have a good access to transportation, also close to populated places, maybe have some criteria on what is the income, what is the population composition. All this can come into the picture, but most likely those information are distributed across multiple themes. So overlay analysis helps us to bring them together. The last kind of application is to be able to bring many different variables together, because maybe we have detailed analysis for either correlation or summary that requires us to have a number of variables in place. Overlay analysis is most likely to be used when you have many-to-many applications, many polygons and related to many other polygons, or many line features related to many other polygon features. So if you have only one-to-one, you may be able to do with very simple interactive analysis, but overlay can process a large quantity of many-to-many relationships. Specifically, what is the map overlay? Map overlay is basically taking 2 input map and generate a new output map. The input map can be either points or lines and polygons, and they don't have to be the same. Okay, it could be one input is the point and the second input is the polygon. Okay, in that case we call it point in polygon. Okay, or the first input is line and the second input is a polygon, then we call it a line to polygon overlay. So it depends on what kind of input we have some further differentiation of the overlay analysis. In terms of overlay with geography, with geometry, there's a question is whether we want to keep all these geometric shapes from both of the input seams, or we want to only keep the overlap. Depending on the answer, the operation could be either intersect or union. Either way, we have to decide on geometric change as well as the attributes change. So map overlay can take so many different forms, but in general, we can tell whether it's intersect or union, or whether it's in a point in polygon overlay or polygon in polygon overlay. All this depends on how you analyze your problems. So understanding the problem and be able to articulate the nature of the questions that you try to answer will help to decide which form of overlay is the right match. When we talk about overlay analysis, basically we talk about two forms of analysis. One is called intersect, the other is called a union. The difference is mainly on the geometric operations you're going to do. Okay? So intersect, we're going to keep only the overlapping areas in the output, but union, we're going to keep both the overlapping and non-overlapping areas in the output. In terms of attributes, we have a number of choices. Okay, the simple case, we transfer all the attributes from both the input seams to the outputs. Okay, so we can know all the variables carried with the input. But in some situations, we may not need to do that. We could just simply refer to the IDs of those features without even bothering storing the attributes. These two forms are most commonly used. The geometric calculations are not as simple, but usually that's done by machine. So ArcGIS have these two forms. Okay, you can actually find out the functions from geoprocessing manuals of ArcGIS. So let's take a look at the union overlay first. Union overlay is useful when we try to combine the similar features into the outputs. The example we give here, we want to find out the forest area that cannot be harvested. First rule says the proximity of those streams needs to be protected. To follow that rule, we have generated the polygon areas showing the areas in the neighborhood of the streams. Okay? On the map shown as the blue lines, blue areas. And the second criteria for non-harvesting forest is those areas are close to a rare species bird nest. And those shown in the yellow circle. Both of these areas are representing the non-harvestable areas. So the question is, can we get these two kind of components into one data set? So it doesn't matter whether they are close to bird nest or streams, but they are not harvestable. The features input basically from these two subsets, and each one of them have IDs and other attributes, okay, shapes and areas. Okay. In order to do a union, basically we need to calculate the geometry so that we can figure out where the overlapping and non-overlapping areas and output them to the destination feature class. Okay. So in this case, we only are interested at the overall areas of the non-harvestable areas. Okay. So we can do a simple union analysis. So this union analysis can be done in ArcGIS. If you go to the geoprocessing menu and open up the union function, you're going to get a dialog box. So whenever you do your union overlay, you basically need to indicate the input features, and it has to be 2 or more of those. When you do union, basically the 2 feature classes need to be a similar type, right? Whether they are all points or all lines or polygons. In this case, we have 2 input and all polygon features. And then we need to indicate where the destination directory or folder you want to generate the output. And basically the geometry is predetermined, but the question that you have to answer is whether you want to have all the attributes to keep for the end results, or you just want to know the IDs. So in this case, we choose the ID only choice, so that at least we can tell which of the component map they come from. So in terms of the attributes operation, we concatenate the attributes table from both of the seams and form a bigger table. Because we choose the ID only, each of the polygon will show the feature IDs from both of the original seams. Okay? So the combination should be unique in a sense. Intersect is useful when we try to figure out the proportion or part of this as inside a particular predetermined area. For example, we have a map showing the land use parcels of a different land use type. If we have a pollution source that is going to pollute a certain area, and in this case we represented that pollution area as gray circular areas. The question is, how can we identify the acreage of the polluted area so that we can seek for compensation maybe? By doing an intersect overlay, we can figure out exactly how much portion of the parcels inside partially. So the end result of that intersect is something similar to the map at the lower left. They are bits and pieces sometimes because there's involvement of mutually cutting each other to form small polygons. You may find there's a lot of small things there. The question is whether we want to treat them as one or we want to treat them as separate. In this case, we probably want to treat each polygon as separate because we may want to do some statistics saying what the percentage of each of the land use type is going to be affected by the pollution areas. So if you're interested to find out how the point seams are falling into areas of polygon seams, we call this kind of analysis as a point in polygon overlay. And the question can be asked in one of the 2 ways. You could start with the points, for example, crime data that is shown in the map. Basically, we can ask, say, which of the administrative areas or district that this crime happened. That involves relating the crime instance data, the location, to the district information. Okay. And one of the way we can do that, as we have learned from the previous class, we can do a spatial drawing. A spatial drawing brings the attributes of the crime with the district information. You can also do a spatial drawing the other way, starting from the district polygon table, and then you can actually do a drawing so that you can bring the attributes of the crimes to those districts. We have actually many different crimes in one district, as we learned that using this kind of spatial drawing, we can either count or we can do sum, we can do average. Okay? So we have a number of different methods to transfer attributes. We may also be interested in finding out how the line features fall inside either fully or partially to the areas or polygons. In this kind of situation, we will usually do an intersect operation and using the boundaries of the areas to cut the linear features into segments so that each segment will only fall into one area. Okay. So this kind of analysis is very good at figuring out the percentage of the linear pieces, for example, rows and rivers. After the intersect operation, some statistics can be calculated as, for example, how long of the particular feature are within certain categories of areas. In the example we show here, we are interested in how the distribution of creeks across different parcels. In order to get a clear statistics, we need to figure out even the creek is partially inside, but we want to know exactly how long. The creek data features we see here cross multiple parcels. Because the feature class information for this creek linear feature only show the total length, but we are interested in the individual segments within certain area. Those answers cannot be directly from the attributes table. By calculating the overlay, we will be able to do summary on top of that. In order to calculate the intersections of linear features to polygon features, we can use the intersect tools. The to input will be one of the linear features. For example, we have a creeks as one of the input, described as lines. And then we have this polygon features representing land parcels. When the creeks cross the boundary of multiple parcels, we're going to do intersections so that the creek feature will be broken into pieces. Each pieces will only be in one of the areas. I have shown on this figure on the top of the map, it shows one selected piece that's the kind of one feature going across multiple polygons. But if you play with the result of the intersection, you're going to find out each of the segments only happens within a particular polygon. In terms of the attributes table, we see this table on the bottom right showing the result of the attributes table. It has the feature IDs from both of the input. So we can actually relate the output of this intersection back to the input source. Overlay between two polygon areas also can happen in two forms, intersect or union. We have a hypothetical illustration of how this two operation works. It's obvious from this illustrative figure because they're cutting each other and there's gaps in between overlapping areas. You're going to see some fragments that are scattered. Okay? Well, depending on the application or the subsequent analysis, you may be able to treat all these polygons, small polygons, as a single feature that you can report together, or you may have to do some summary across different subsets. When you choose to do dissolve or non-dissolve, that's where we have the implications. Let's take a look at the example of polygon to polygon overlay. Here we have the land parcels distributed across the area. We want to consider the impact of the flood zones on those parcels. When the designated flood zones is a real flood, we have to notify the impacted area, impacted parcel. We also have to estimate the loss of land use by land use type. On the map on the right, we show both of the areas. So the job for us to do intersect overlay so that we can find exactly what piece of those parcels fall into this particular flood zones. When we come to this kind of data analysis, the first thing come to our mind, let's do an overlay. But you may want to think further because depending on the question you get, you may or may not need the map overlay. Okay? For example, if we are asked the question, how many parcels in the floodplain? Okay? To answer this kind of question, basically whether the parcel is completely inside or only partially inside the flood zone doesn't matter that much. Okay, as long as they have something touch on the flood zone, we can say that they are impacted. Okay. For a question like this, we can answer those by simply doing the select by location, where we can use the intersect as a spatial relationship operator between the flood zones and parcels. Okay. So the end result is shown somewhat like the figure on the right, and it includes both the parcels that completely inside the flood zone as well as those parcels on the kind of crossing the ins and outs of the flood zones. So this will be overestimating in a sense, but if you really try to calculate the areas, then the errors will be huge. You can see there's some of the parcels actually, majority of that parcel actually is outside of the flood zone. Yeah. So if your question is not simply count the number of parcels, but also you want to figure out what the total areas of the land use that get impacted by the flood area, then we do need to break down the areas into whether they're inside or outside of the flood zone. Okay. In this case, we're going to do an intersect. The result is shown on the map on the right. You see that the flood zone cut the parcels, and the parcels boundary also cut the flood zone boundaries. Okay? And then we only keep the overlapping areas into the output.